Let me say my name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the founder and academic director here at the Hannah Arendt Center, and welcome to this session of the virtual reading group. We are reading today Hannah Arendt's book, Essays in Understanding, edited by Jerome Cohn, who I got to spend time with yesterday. And we're reading, we're in the middle of the book, really almost smack dab in the middle of the book. And we're now entering a period of essays written in the 1950s. Let's just remind ourselves a little bit about the 1950s. Hannah Arendt has just published The Origins of Totalitarianism. It came out in 1950, or it's about to be published. And she sort of rushed it into publication, as she says a number of times. The book had started out largely about anti-Semitism, racism, and imperialism. That was actually one of the first working titles of the book. And it was largely going to be about Germany. And only later in the 40s, somewhere around 47, 48, did she really start to realize that she had to include Bolshevist Russia in it, and expanded the book to include the last part. Even so, she says in a number of letters that in her mind, the book was never finished. She never really, in her mind, understood what totalitarianism was when she published the first edition of the book. And one of the things that happens in the 1950s is she writes a number of essays in which she continues to explore this question, culminating in an essay that she published 5 times, including as a new final epilogue to the second edition of The Origins of Totalitarianism, Ideology and Terror. We're going to read a lot of those essays in the next few weeks in this book. Understanding and Politics and the Nature of Totalitarianism are 2 of the really important ones. But these 2 that we're reading today are also part of that effort that she undergoes here to rethink what totalitarianism is in the wake of having published this book, Origins of Totalitarianism. And so these are really rich essays. And let me see what I can do to start us off, and then we'll have a discussion. So the first essay, Social Science Techniques and the Study of Concentration Camps. This is there's an interesting frame that this essay has. So the beginning, the first page or page and a half, and the last page and a half raise the question of social science techniques and how they are inadequate to think through totalitarianism and concentration camps. And then the bulk of the middle part of the essay is about concentration camps and how one must think about them. So very quickly about social science for Hannah Arendt, and she takes this both from her 2 mentors, both Heidegger and Jaspers. Every science has inarticulate assumptions that are exploded when they're confronted with unexpected phenomena. And as she says, the thesis of this article, published in Jewish Social Studies in 1950, is that the camps, not just anything else in totalitarianism, but the camps specifically, were the unexpected phenomena, the stumbling block that made any kind of normal, regular understanding of contemporary politics and society impossible. And she says the study of the camps actually must cause social scientists to reconsider their fundamental preconceptions. Now, what are the fundamental preconceptions that social scientists have? Well, if you teach in social science departments or you have ever studied social science, you may or may not know, because I think unfortunately many social scientists don't know the inarticulated assumptions of their own discipline. That the assumptions of social science is that man can be reduced to rules, that man is a rule-bound, predictable character or animal. Just like the physical world follows physical rules, whether it's the rules of gravity or relativity. Um, the premise of social science is that human beings follow predictable, knowable, calculable rules. And if you're an economist or an economic political thinker, um, you generally think that the rules that human beings follow are utilitarian or self-interest, something along those lines. Um, and yet she says, with the camps, with the rise of totalitarian camps, we are confronted with something that is neither utilitarian um, nor um, nor I'm sorry, someone's just saying they got removed. Neither utilitarian nor based in self-interest, and she says that these camps, and this is on page 233. She says these camps were based not on self-interest or utility, but only on the fantastic ideological claims of racism in its logical purity. So it's this claim of the camps as based in a kind of logical purity of racism and not in utility or self-interest that she says is going to make us reconsider our understanding of social science as an ability to understand man. Okay, so how does she understand the camps? She says the camps must be understood as unprecedented, as not based in things that have happened in the past, and what they are as unprecedented is the emergence of quote the inflexible logic of paranoid systems that overwhelms reality and demands logical perfection of an ideological fantasy. In other words, the camps are a systematic expression of an ideological racist fantasy that overwhelms reality. That's going to be her argument. And the first step of the argument is that there's actually a lot of stages that we go through before we get to totalitarianism. So she says in this great and somewhat famous quote, she uses it in a number of different places on page 233, the road to total domination leads through many intermediary stages and normal and comprehensible stages. Most stages on the way to totalitarianism are comprehensible and have purposes. So if you're engaged in debates today about whether there are rising fascist governments in the world, whether in the United States or in Europe or elsewhere, one of the hard parts, if you're honest about such a debate, is that we're not there yet, clearly. And some people see us getting there, and some people say, well, look, we're at everything that's being done has a comprehensible, normal purpose. And this is the hard part about thinking about these kind of questions, is that it happens in these stages, and most stages are rational. Now, we've talked about Arendt's hard-hearted realism in the past, and the next few pages are extraordinary in showing her hard-hearted realism, because she says, look, let's look at these stages that went through in Germany. She says, Jew hatred is not new. So simply hatred of Jews is not a new thing, and is not something that is at the core of totalitarianism. The Nuremberg laws, she says, are not new, right? So laws saying that Jews can't run certain businesses or or that they don't have certain rights of citizenship, can't marry non-Jews. Again, she says these were things that happened all over the place, and not so good, but certainly not anything extraordinary. She says the ruthless elimination of Jews from the German economy between 1936 and 1938, culminating with the Kristallnacht pogroms of 1938. She says we're still within the framework of what is expected within anti-Semitic governments in any European country. Again, not good, but she says not totalitarian. She says the ghettos that happened and arose in Eastern Europe, the Warsaw Ghetto amongst them, and the concentration camps during the first years of the war, right, prior to 1940, were not surprising. She says they were hideous and criminal, but entirely rational. It's on page 235. The forced immigration and robbery, she says, were calculated to spread anti-Semitism throughout the world. And she cites some German reports to show that in the footnotes. And thus they were rational political acts. The idea of relocating Jews to Madagascar was expected by outsiders and even by Jews. And thus, she says, comprehensible within a normal frame. Now, I just want to be clear. She thinks these things, as she says, are hideous and criminal, but she doesn't think that they are extraordinary. She thinks they're part of the history of anti-Semitism, but also the history of politics throughout the world. It's only with the rise of the death camps, factories, and the genocide of the Jews, and not only the Jews, but the Jews as a prelude to the genocide of other peoples, including the sick, that Arendt says we transcend anti-Semitism, and we transcend utility, and we transcend self-interest, and we enter a world in which the camps are governed not by kind of socially meaningful, comprehensible things, but by the logical culmination of racial purity, of an ideological purity of racism. And this, she says, is sort of what happens with total terror. She has a fair bit here about what total terror is. I'm not going to go into it all. We can talk about it in detail in the Q&A if you'd like. She then comes back at the end to this question of social science, and she says that the unreality of these camps, right? So just to deal a little bit, the camps, she says, were full of innocent people. They were permanent. They are not normal prison camps. And inside, they were regulated by a permanent state of dying. So there was a kind of unreality to these camps. They didn't fit any kind of real common sense, self-interested or utilitarian ideal. And the unreality of these camps makes it hard, she says, handicaps social scientists. Because the people in the camps are not normal men. They're now ruled by fanaticism and pseudoscience. And if you look at them from above, as a social scientist would, or as a neutral observer would, what you see is insanity. An insane logical consistency that can be deduced from racism. But she says this explains at the same time everything and nothing. I think that's an important point to leave as a question. What does it mean to say that racism in this situation explains everything and nothing? On the one hand, they are governed by racism, and it's like an ideological purity, and that is what governs these camps. But what does she mean when she says it explains nothing? Well, I think what she means is, why are they doing it? It's actually, you can't find normal human explanations. I mean, except I think one, which she doesn't mention in this essay, but she does in the origins of totalitarianism, which is the deep human need, especially in a time of uprootedness and loneliness and meaninglessness and purposelessness, to be part of an ironclad ideological system that gives your life meaning. Um, and that is, I think, well, she doesn't talk about that in this essay, but I think that's the underlying idea here, which she largely develops in a series of essays over the next 2 or 3 years. So we'll come to that when we read Understanding in Politics and On the Nature of Totalitarianism. The second essay we read for today is an essay that she wrote for commentary, again in 1950. The background of this essay is that she had gone in 1949 to Germany as for her first time back after the war, as the executive director of a group that was charged with finding and cataloging all the Jewish communal property, Torah, candlesticks, things that had been stolen or put in museums or hidden or who knows, wherever, that had survived the war, and cataloging it, and then deciding where it should go to. This was a thorny legal problem. Where did this property belong? Did it belong to the Jewish communities it came from? Did it belong to Jews in the diaspora? Did it belong to Jews in Israel? It was a difficult, thorny question. And this Jewish Committee on Cultural Reconstruction, the two people who were sent to Europe to work this out were Gershom Scholem and Hannah Arendt. And they had been friends, and they spent this time together and became even closer friends. And while she was there, she spent a few months in Germany. And she wrote The Aftermath of Nazi Rule, Report from Germany, about her impressions. This is written for commentary, again, in 1950. The core of this essay, I think, is the beginning of it. I'm going to focus on that. You can ask about other things as well. But she begins with the premise that Germany laid waste to the moral structure of Western society, and yet nowhere, she says, is this tragedy less felt and less talked about. And she gives examples that obviously she confronted during her trip back to Germany, that people would send postcards to each other with the old buildings as if nothing had happened. There was an indifference. There was no mourning. She called it heartless. And on page 249, she writes about the stubborn and at times vicious refusal to face what happened. She sort of gives an example of a fantasy conversation on page 249 again, where she would sort of say to someone, if you tell them I'm a Jew, they would pause and say, well, where did you go after Germany? There was no expression of sympathy or regret or responsibility. And she said they would then immediately offer stories of German suffering, which of course were true, but as she says, besides the point. An interesting question. I think as I read this, I assume many of you feel the same way. You can't but think about, a conversation with someone, between a white and a black American, right? And how are these discussions navigated? And then immediately the German would say that there's a balance, seek to serve a balance between German suffering and the suffering of others. And she says on page 250, I think the key line of the essay, that such an escape from reality is also, of course, an escape from responsibility. And I think that's what needs to be thought through here. So what is this reality that is escaped, and how is it related to an escape from responsibility? She says that the reality of the death factories is transformed into a mere potentiality. What does she mean by that? She means that the Germans say, well, yes, we did it, but other people would have done it too. It's not that we did it. it's that, yeah, we did it, but it was a potentiality that anybody could and would have done. There's a kind of equality of sinfulness. There's also an equality of destruction, she says, where the German suffering is equated with the Jewish suffering. But then she says the most frightening aspect, and this is the part we'll focus on, the most frightening aspect of the German flight from reality, this is on page 251 forward, is the habit of treating facts as if they were opinions. And now this is something, that gets a lot of attention right now. It's talked a lot about. I think it's still one of the hardest and most profound, but most dark parts of Arendt's thinking, especially in the way it's to be applied today, if we want to try and apply it today. And I hope we get to talk about that. She says that on the one hand, they just treat facts as if they were opinions. For example, they say that Russia started the war with an attack on Danzig. These are simply, untrue, but you state them, and now facts are seen to be as, well, we disagree about facts, therefore they're opinions. She also says that everyone seems to think they have a right to ignorance. So if you simply say, well, I don't know who started the war, right? Or I don't know about the concentration camps. You have a right to your ignorance, and because you have a right to your opinion can be, well, I don't know. She then says that this flight from reality, this is on the next page, on page 252, is sourced or has its foundation in Nazi totalitarian propaganda, as opposed to the usual political lies. So it's not just a lie. What is it? It's the consistent denial of importance of facts in general. It's the idea that all facts can be changed and all lies can be made true. And this flight from reality, she says, is not based in indoctrination. It's not based in me convincing you through propaganda of the fact that the Russian attack on Danzig started the war. It's based in the cynical belief that there's no distinction between fact and opinion, and thus that we can all have our opinions, we can all be ignorant, and we don't actually need to know the facts. She then goes through a couple of examples. The universities, she says, need to be able to do honest research. She says there's two different dangers in the universities. One is the danger is an attack on free speech by tyrants, but the other is a danger of those who ignore facts and reality. Just again, I know this will come up in questions, but just to let you know where I think some of the pitfalls and dangers are here. Who's threatening free speech on universities today, right? Well, one group is going to say it's going to be someone like President Trump, who argues that, free speech may not be so great. And the other group's going to say, no, it's people on the left who demand that people not be allowed to speak if they don't agree with us. And then where is the danger from those who ignore facts and reality, right? Well, one group is going to say it's on the right, those who ignore, the deep traumatic impacts of racism. And others are going to say, no, it's the people on the left who don't want to talk about, the autopsy report of George Floyd and have suppressed it and won't let it out, or don't want to talk about the fact that this jerk who killed 3 people at a protest in Wisconsin was actually being chased and had a Molotov cocktail thrown at him. And the point is, both sides are now claiming that the other side is refusing to engage in reality and facts. And what we see is a complete divorce, a complete loss of any common world, and a consistent denial increasingly of the importance of facts. People don't want to engage with the facts. And that is what Arendt saw deeply in Germany. There's a lot more in this essay, but I'm going to stop there because I figure there's a lot to talk about today. And if you want to bring up parts later in the essay, you can. So let me stop there and see. I see there's a bunch of hands up. I'm going to go through the hands. I think that's the only fair way to do it. I've had people suggest different ways. If you really feel a need to ask a question and you feel like you need to interrupt, let me know, either by messaging me personally or you're saying, I do have a question that's important, and I'll try and use my judgment to let people in. Okay, Susan, you're up first.
So my question is about her description on page 240 about total domination is achieved when the human person, who somehow is always a specific mixture of spontaneity and being conditioned, has been transformed into a completely conditioned being whose reactions can be calculated even when he is led to certain death. She's describing the prisoners in the concentration camps. So I'm just wondering if this applies to the guards.
Okay. I don't think I don't think that applies to the guards. I mean, the guards are not. So when she's talking about total domination, she then talks about 3 stages, right, of the way that someone becomes completely conditioned. Someone's reactions can be calculated even when he's led to certain death. She says the disintegration of personality is in different stages, and there's 3 of them. She does this in 8 lines. These 3. If you're interested in the origins of totalitarianism, there's 10 pages on these 3 lines. But the first stage is the what she calls the destruction of the judicial person. Namely, that I am now one should hear in the word person something that Arendt would hear because she's a Latin speaker. Person means per sonare, which in Latin means sonar, to sound, through, per. So a person in Latin is a citizen, someone in whom the law sounds through with legal rights. And so a person was opposed to a slave in Rome or to foreigners because a person had the law sound through them. What she says is you cannot be a person without being a citizen in some sense. This is something she'll repeat also in The Origins of Totalitarianism. You need to be a member of something, to have a law, to have a world. And so the loss of citizenship through arbitrary arrest and the imprisonment of innocents, and the being put into camps that are permanent and don't and operate outside of the normal penal system. All of these things destroys part of your personality. The fact that you have rights and you have a voice to speak and act in public. The second, she says, is the destruction of moral personality, which is that it makes protest useless and impossible because no one will hear you. And you're just sort of stuck in this camp. And so if you try and become a martyr, your martyrdom is useless, is senseless and empty. And the third is that it kills the individual, which she calls the most terrible triumph, by cutting the moral person off from the individualist escape to become, well, even if you're not moral, you can at least, I'm going to be me. And I'm going to act according to my conscience. And she says it makes even that impossible because in a camp, you can be confronted, as many prisoners were, with the decision between betraying your wife and children or your husband and children or killing your friends. Who are you going to murder? And the choice between murdering one person or another, she says, is no individual choice. and it reduces man to a kind of pure animality. You know, to your question, Susan, the the guards certainly, you know, we can say a lot about them, but they didn't have their juridical, moral, and personality and individuality taken away from them, at least not in Arendt's reading, and I don't think they did. So I would say that they're quite different. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, he's saying that these guards are normal people. They're not sadists. They're not picked for that. And we're trying to understand how living under totalitarian domination impacts everyone. So I guess, I hear certainly the distinction between the prisoners and the guards, but trying to understand what is operating in the guards, I guess, is part of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, this essay is not about the guards, right? There are other essays about the guards. You know, she's going to say that they were largely normal men, not criminals, not sadists, who learned to look away, uh, just like Eichmann did. Um, and that's and that they some of them were believers in the Nazi ideology, but many of them were simply people who decided that, you know, listening to people smarter than them and obeying the law was part of their moral duty, even if they didn't like it. Um, and then came to see that as a virtue. And that's the Eichmann. That's what she says happened to Eichmann, is he came to see law abidingness as such a virtue that he was willing to see it as acting moral and ethical to obey the law, even mistakenly invoking Kant's categorical imperative, right? That you must put yourself under the law. Daphna.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Actually, I was going to engage with Susan's question because I find this article to be, of all of Hannah Arendt's independent individual article essays, to be the most depressing and hardest to read. I've read it several times with various scholars, and I've always gotten incredibly depressed and couldn't actually finish it. But I think it describes a system where everyone is complicit, even when they are unknowing about their complicity. I think that even the commanders, and I don't know if she's written about this, the guards in particular, I defer to your much superior scholarship of Hannah Arendt, but I think that the implication here is that everyone, even if they were innocent, were guilty. And I think she describes a system where there is no individual incentive, there are no goals. The system perpetuates itself, even though there's no reason to be a guard. There's no reason. I mean, it's all a system of death. It's a system of total destruction, and there is not a single element of humanity left. So the question, you know, in her writing that she raises to me is, how did such a system manage to exist? There is nothing left of the human being in it. They can't do anything of their own volition, and whatever they do, there's no purpose to, and eventually they can see that. So that was kind of my feeling about this horrible system of destruction that she describes in this chapter. I think that she writes more about it in The Origins of Totalitarianism, but this standalone is devastating.
Well, yes, thank you. I agree with you that this is a devastating essay. I mean, I think, as is the last 100 pages of The Origins of Totalitarianism. Um, Truly devastating. I think the question that to me is raised is what does it mean to think of a society built upon the insane logical consistency of racism, um, which she says explains everything and nothing. And you know, I think what it means is that, to at least in one part, that normal human reactions are overcome by a kind of lunacy and fanatic demand for consistency. Where does that come from, right? Is one question she wants to ask. And one of the consistent answers she gives, whether you agree with it or not, is not from hatred, right? But from a need for consistency. A deep and profound need for consistency that she says comes out of a kind of profound metaphysical loneliness, or is at least in some way prepared for by this kind of metaphysical loneliness and meaninglessness and rootlessness, but also out of the failure of the nation state system to create meaningful, meaningful peoples to replace older variations, whether they be tribes or families or traditions or religions or whatever it is. And thus the mixture in of a kind of world domination, kind of imperialist drive. And then add in the rise of bureaucracy, which allows for the rule of people who are seen as other than you in colonial periods, and thus bureaucratic rule. And all of these things, plus others, for her, are sort of in the sort of mix that makes this new, unprecedented, kind of fanatic, insane, logical, consistent government, which had never existed before in the world, possible. And then the question is, how do we start thinking about man after this, right? Humanity. Is man, as we continue to say in social science, self-interested? Is he utilitarian? And what she's sort of saying is no. In many ways, they're not, and we need to take that seriously. I'm not sure I can answer your question much more than that, but if anyone else wants to offer an answer, I'm thrilled to hear it.
It wasn't very much a question. It was really sort of a continuation of the previous question
Right.
that Susan raised. But I do fear that when I read this essay about the total lack of any human element and the ability of people who were complicit, whether intentionally or just because they had absolutely no self-awareness, and the amount of destruction that they could cause is what scares me in today's politics. So I'm always glad that I'm getting old, because I won't have to watch this again.
Yeah, I hear that.
Could I say something, Roger?
Yes.
So, obviously no answer, although I share Daphna's horror. It was horrible reading this chapter. It does make me think, particularly because of some of your comments, Roger, of Barbara Field's book, Racecraft, with her sister, because when she talks about that this racist ideology, she compares it to, people's fear of witches, which was totally irrational, but became the raison d'etre, for society. And when you think about the determination today, of making America a great white supremacist country again, it's hard not to think about how a totally insane idea can take hold and predominate and support, the kinds of policies and people who are surrounding Trump today. And, it's very frustrating because you feel like, it's not because of that logic, any other kind of illogical discussion just falls by the wayside. So that's more of an expression of horror and despair, I guess, than really asking a question. But
And are there other responses to this particular thread?
Yes, I have one.
Go ahead.
Hearing my previous colleague, I think that Arendt in this context she's not saying that there is no human element there. To the contrary, what she's saying is, hey, there is a new element that we have to take into account, though it is a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think what she's saying is that it's a new element that's very hard for social scientists to take seriously. It's almost more literary, and she calls it a coherent fiction in The Origin of Totalitarianism. And it's not entirely clear to what extent replicable human motives are at issue here. This brings up a question that's in the chat from Anita, where she says that she's confused because Arendt says that the camps are not utilitarian, and yet that they are also laboratories for, as is on page 236 of the text, laboratories for the experimentation in total domination. And I think this goes to Clara, your question right now, or your point, like to what extent, what Arendt means simply is that they're not utilitarian, these camps, in the sense that they serve normal utility interest or self-interest. They don't serve the economy. They don't serve the self-interest, in the sense of normal political understandings. But they are laboratories, as she puts it, in how to destroy humanity, to destroy the human in humanity. If that's utilitarian, it's not clear who it's utilitarian for. I guess that would be my question. Yes. So it obviously, one could say it serves a purpose, but for Arendt, it's an inhuman purpose. Inhuman, not in the sense of bad, but inhuman in the sense of it denies humanity. It's turning humans into automatons or animals. And for her, that would be not what she would think of as normal utility behavior studied by social scientists. To the extent it becomes more normal, we have to think about, what that means. Anyone else want to add to this particular discussion before I move on through the list?
Can I come in?
Is this related to this discussion, David?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, yeah, let's just keep it brief. Yeah. I want to move on through the list, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll wait for my turn, Roger. If you feel
Okay.
Would you
All
rather
right.
for my turn?
Yeah, you're coming up soon. All right, Jack, you're next.
Okay, you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. So, first of all, I want to express, I can only say kinship with Daphna, that I found it impossible to finish reading this myself. It's the two pieces together are so overwhelmingly depressing. I think not so much because of what the story that they tell, because I've read that before, even in Hannah Arendt, but because of their proximity to the events. And that kind of just aroused in me, because it's part of my lifetime, aroused in me a feeling of very deep depression. But I did want to say there was something in that caught my attention that I thought was really applicable to the present day in America, that I just wanted to talk a little bit about. She says that when she's talking about, she's not yet talking about making up facts or ignoring facts, but she does say that the reality of the death factories gets transformed into a mere potentiality, and that's a defense. That's a way for the Germans to escape a feeling of guilt, or actually a feeling. She talks about just the shock of learning what was happening in the camps. And around this, she says that
it's on page 250 for everyone, just so you know.
Thank you. I don't have a page number because I'm in Kindle. But around this, what she says is that what the Allies are doing in post-war Germany is feeling like it feels like a campaign of successful revenge to the Germans. And she goes on to say, and this is what I think is interesting, she says, the insistence that there must be a careful scheme of revenge serves as a consoling argument demonstrating the equal sinfulness of all men.
Right.
And when I read that, what came to my mind is the reaction of some people in America to Black Lives Matter. And my thinking about this is that people that I hang out with tend to consider the ongoing rebellion as provoked by the reemergence or the exposure that the Trump administration has given to the existing racism in the society. And I think of it in a way the other way around. I think that one of the things that has happened is that the presence of this protest everywhere in the country feels to some people, or they explain it to themselves as revenge for something that they are unwilling to admit, which is the entire history of white supremacy. So the reaction, I'm feeling that it's a kind of that what we're seeing to some extent in some people is a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement that arouses in them the fear. I don't want to use the word fear because fear is often used to explain this. It isn't fear. The belief that that they are the victims of a revenge, and that revenge only proves that everybody is capable of the same evil activity.
I think that's probably a very profound point. I think that you can't read this essay, as difficult as it is to read this essay, for the reasons you and Daphna say, Jack, right? So the proximity to the events, etc. You can't read these two essays today and not think about the ways in which this is applying throughout our society today, on questions of refugees, on questions of Black Lives Matter, as you said, and the way that these kind of facts are being denied. There's an evasion from both reality and responsibility. And I think what you said about what she says about revenge is that the feeling that the other side is taking revenge gives us a sense that we're all equal, because, well, they're now using violence against us. They would have used violence against us in the other situation. So we're all sinners. Therefore, we're all equal. this is part of her critique of revenge that she articulates actually in her Denktagebuch, in the first entry of her Denktagebuch, written at exactly this time in 1950, which I've done some writing on. She's very suspicious of the turn towards revenge because it refuses responsibility and creates a kind of moral equivalency, which she denies.
So I just wanted to add, just briefly, that because she says a lot of what she says in these two essays is there in Origins and in other work. You've cited several other later works where some of this stuff is elaborated and so on and so forth. But really, it's those works are, to me, somewhat removed from the events. That is, they're theoretical and intellectual in a way that these essays are not. This is very, very recent, and it's very real. And you see her traipsing around Germany talking to people after the war, which if you did that, you'd know how terrifying that is. So there's an immediacy here that I really want to call everybody's attention to, because that immediacy gives all of these ideas so much more weight.
Yeah.
Because they are a response to something that's very present at that moment. And if we can capture that, we can approach the current moment perhaps in the same way, rather than trying to interpret all of the work of Hannah Arendt and then apply.
That's what I'm hoping you guys will do. I mean, I'm happy to do it too, but I'm here to lead us through Hannah Arendt to some degree. And we can talk about that. But Margaret, let's go on.
Hi. I have, I guess, a two-part question. Both parts really come down to what I guess I would call context. Or, if you're not going to start from a basis of metaphysics or some sort of structural understanding of things, then how do you have firm ground underfoot? And what I mean by that in my question is, she talks about responsibility in each of these pieces. And if you don't accept facts, and if you go by opinion rather than facts, to put it simplistically, you can't take responsibility. How do I take responsibility for my opinion? I have to take responsibility for facts. And if I don't believe those, then how can I? And also in terms, what you just referenced a little bit of, Roger, which certainly we've seen a lot of in the US over the last 4 years, or rather in the last presidential campaign, certainly, what's come to be called false equivalences, whether it's attempts by media outlets to show lack of bias or what have you, but the idea of, well, yeah, he did something wrong, but yeah, this one did something wrong too. And if you have no means of analyzing which things are worse, how do you take and or assign responsibility?
I think that's fair, but in order to some degree to analyze which things are worse, you to some degree also have to confront the reality. And what I think she saw in Germany at this point is an unwillingness to confront the reality. And honestly, I mean, I think what I was trying to say here, and I don't know if it's a false equivalency or not, but I think when I look at the narratives that emerge about any political issue on the left and the right today, I see both sides refusing to accept or address facts that they don't find fit in their narrative.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with you on that. I'm talking about something that has become pretty, as pervasive as so-called alternative facts. that there doesn't seem to be any kind of ranking or hierarchy of, one thing worse than another.
And
And,
that's
and if I can line up my opinion next to your fact and they can both be wrong, then gee, they're both just the same, and everything seems to sort of get swept off the table that way. And I'm kind of curious why it seems like obvious that she was going there in these essays, but it doesn't seem like she closed that circle. If that followed.
Maybe this is worth taking a look at on page 260 in relation to what I at least going to try and understand, Margaret, your question to be about Ernst Junger's diaries. Ernst Junger was a brilliant writer. I mean, the book I most love of him is Auf der Marmorklippen, on the marbled cliffs. But he fought in World War I and wrote a book about World War I that was loved by the Nazis, about sort of the brutality of modern warfare. But he was a anti-Nazi from day one. And she says on page
do everything.
What? Oh. And she says on page 260 that Ernst Junger's war diaries offer perhaps the best and most honest evidence of the tremendous difficulties the individual encounters in keeping himself and his standard of truth and morality intact in a world where truth and morality have lost all visible expression. This is, I mean, we all know, maybe, I hope, a few people in our lives who we think of as people who are trying their damnedest to hold on to their standards of truth and morality. No one does it 100%, but we all, I hope, have some people who are models for us of trying to do it. She says that despite the undeniable influence of Junger's earlier writings on certain members of the Nazi intelligentsia, he was an active anti-Nazi from the first to the last day of the regime, proving that the somewhat old-fashioned notion of honor, once current in the Prussian officer corps, was quite sufficient for individual resistance. So here's a side note that there's different reasons that people seek to uphold their standards of truth. One is decency or honor. Another is a belief in liberalism, in liberal values of persuasiveness and hearing all opinions. There are many different reasons, but there they are. She says, yet even this unquestionable integrity of Ernst Junger's has a hollow ring. It is as though morality had ceased to work and had become an empty shell into which the person who has to live, function, and survive all day long retires for the night and solitude only. Day and night become nightmares for each other. The moral judgment reserved for the night is a nightmare of fear of being discovered by day. And the life of the day is a nightmare of horror in the betrayal of the intact conscience that functions at night. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I feel it. You say things during the day that you're worried that at night you will berate yourself for because you didn't have the honor or the integrity or the bravery or the courage to say them, right? And at night you think things that you know you can't say during the day. That doesn't describe the situation many of us are in today. I don't know what does. How one makes judgments in such a situation, Margaret, these kind of moral judgments, is that you have to strive to your best effort and under tremendous difficulties to hold on to your standards of truth and morality. I mean, I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but that's what it made me, that's where it brought me, and that's how I thought about it.
Well, I guess Yeah, well, that's why I brought up context, that it seems to me that you have to have some sort of ground underfoot, and whether that ground underfoot is history, just to put it under one banner, something by means of which you have and or develop and or strive to live by a code. It has to be contextualized in something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the realities that we have to face right now is that our ground underfoot has become quicksand.
That's
We
exactly
we
right.
don't have a ground underfoot. And so what you see right now is, look, it's much more complicated than this, but I'll just simplify it. The right and the left are each insisting that they have ground underfoot. And as a result, they're unwilling to talk to the other. What neither of them are willing to accept is that the world we share is one in which the ground underfoot has either been destroyed or is transforming. And they're unwilling to take the risk of facing that reality, because it would mean that they don't have firm ground under feet. And what we see right now is everyone wants to act as if they have only firm ground under their feet when they don't. And part of the facing up to reality is facing up to the fact that the world that the right wants or the world that the left wants has been destroyed and is not coming back. And somehow we have to find some new ground. And that's only going to come, Arendt tells us, whether you agree with her or not, through talking and talking and talking and facing up to our disagreements and our completely lost animosities and loss of context. And over time, in that talking, a new ground will emerge. That's her claim in a number of her works. It takes time and it takes courage. And we don't have a lot of courage or patience today. David, go ahead. Thanks for your patience, David. You have patience.
I found what you said very, that quotation, which I hadn't got to yet, incredibly moving. I'm just trying to, I suppose like all of us, trying to grapple with what kind of group psychology or mental state, because as you say, and as she shows, it's not functional, and towards the, when so much is happening on the Eastern Front, all the energy seems to be going into exterminating more Jews. And I just listened to a 6-minute clip, you probably know it quite well, of Himmler talking to the SS in a state of elation about, and he talks about the Jewish bacillus that needs to be exterminated, and that no one must touch any Jewish belongings because the bacillus will get in. So what it made me try to think about was, first of all, there's something about the breaking of boundaries that is associated with a kind of elation. Now we can do anything.
Yeah.
And one boundary leads to the breaking of another one, another, and another. And it has an incredible, horrific momentum. And associated with it is elation and excitement that, anything is possible. But I was also thinking that part of that might be, it's something that Adorno said, that he suggested in the mind of every Nazi, somewhere there's the idea that this whole thing is a delusion. But that idea cannot be allowed in. So there has to be a relentlessness against anything that might cause a question to arise or a doubt. So I think what happened is the humanity of the Jews, or those in the camps, has to constantly be destroyed, because in them resides the doubt. In other words, if there's anything about them that is human, it could raise doubt. So I think the motor force is to preserve the ideology. The alternative, according to Adorno, is collapse into panic. If they stop to think, he says, for a moment, then the whole thing would collapse and they'd be in panic. So it's like having to preserve the delusion, and that becomes more important than any material factor.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the two different parts of what you said are really speak to me. One is about the breaking of boundaries. I wrote a little bit about this weekend in the Amor Mundi for those who saw it, about Arendt's writing about mob rule and mobs and criminality, and the way that the rise of criminal governance becomes a jubilation and a joy. And I think we're seeing that on both sides. I think this one, I think, largely does begin with the entrance of criminality into politics in the current administration, but has now been embraced by the left as well. So yeah, I think everything you said, I find very compelling. Because we're sort of short on time, I'm going to let people ask a couple questions, because there's like 6 more questions and I'm not going to get to them all. But thank you. I thought that was really well said. Rob.
Hi. I wanted to bring up something that was said in chat, referencing Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And the question came up, well, Arendt puts it that we're in this dream, in this kind of illusion. There's these unthinking individuals who kind of are just kind of going along with the part. But Victor's book kind of suggests the opposite, is that that the prisoners in the camps did have a kind of some concept of meaning. I was curious if you have anything to say about those contrasting points.
It's a great question. Thank you. I haven't read Viktor Frankl's book in 30 years or whatever. I mean, it's been a while. I don't remember enough of it. I'm sure that there was some search for meanings going on. Arendt, is reading Bruno Bettelheim and David Rousset and others, and obviously talking about what she thinks is the effort, which is to destroy humanity. I'm not sure I have. I'm sure the effort. Well, she will tell you the effort was not successful. And one of the real changes in her work that you see over from 1950 till the 1960s is that in the 1950s, she writes about these things called the holes of oblivion, this idea that the camps are holes of oblivion where there's no meaning possible, and you can't become a moral person and you lose your individuality, right? Which we just talked about. But by the time of the Eichmann book, she has this beautiful line where she says, what we've learned over time is that there are no holes of oblivion. They can't exist. There's always going to be somebody who tells the story and remembers. And in that sense, every act, even what seem like worthless acts of protest in the camp, become remembered and can have meaning. So I think in many ways she will, I don't know Frankl's book well enough to say, but she certainly does believe that there's ways to make meaning in the camps, but she saw them as experiments in how man could be deprived of that ability. Is that, you can say more about Frankl than I can, so.
That's a good answer, thank you.
All right, thank you. Bill. Bill, are you around?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, Roger.
Okay.
I say to all the people on the call right now, how you feeling? And I don't know if it's cheating in a forum that's trying to keep the high water mark of rational discussion to go to this place that I'm at right now. I spent a lot of time with young Black people and young people. I'm wondering right now, Roger, our letter and the way people push back against it. I'm now, something about this essay, I'm hearing it. I stand by what we did. I'm hearing it differently. What if Hannah Arendt knew what she is telling us about the death machine? If she knew when it was happening, if she didn't have to run, if she was a young German of conscience or a young Jew, what would she do? What would she do? I know that we are saying, I know because I look to you, Roger, as being a voice saying, this is how we get through this darkness. We have to, what does she say? Talk, 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 debate, debate, let the best ideas win. If you see that there is an idea like the death camps that has no there, it is an insane thing. It is a mad thing. It is an inhuman thing. Don't you pick up a fucking gun and shoot? Don't you actually get out and do something? I mean, so help me out here. I'm on these calls because I want to be a more astute political thinker. And then I want to know how to help breed a generation of activists. We're telling them right now, hold on, do not go off. Listen, think, talk, listen, think. You've been watching what's happening at the convention. We all can see it. We all can see it, can't we? So, ladies and gentlemen on the phone, how are you feeling? I understand if Hannah Arendt was here now, what would she say? What should we do? Talk, we talk, we talk. I now understand why the young want to cancel certain things. I don't agree, but certain ideas, if you're trying to sell me the death machine that we have just determined through this brilliant woman's writing is empty and inhuman, what do we do in the face of it? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm almost not, I really don't know how to answer that, Bill, except to say.
And Roger, you shouldn't answer it. Don't answer it. We can just let it sit there. It's not your responsibility. We're all on this call. Remember this moment. Don't make it Roger's job. You don't even have to respond. I've said it. Now, maybe we should move on if people can let it move on. What are you feeling and what do you think should be done? Roger, don't try to answer it. You and I have plenty of time to talk about this. I just want to know where the fire is, the heat is in this group of intellectuals right now.
All right,
let's move on. Let's move on.
If anyone wants to say something in response.
I do, if I can.
Okay, quickly. I want these to be quick, though, please.
Is that me? I can speak now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a refugee from Poland, one of the few that are left. And just to go for that, Hannah Arendt is a brilliant woman, a German Jew who spent the Holocaust at the Upper West Side in New York. And basically, she's wonderful in talking about perpetrators. But from the victim's point of view, she really misses the boat in an awful lot of ways. And I think that's part of, that reflects the Bill's thing. One of the things is that there's a huge sociology of victims. If you just read H.W. Adler's book or Borowski's book or some other Polish books, that tells you the entire sociology in the camps and the whole other part of the Holocaust by bullets that's never even mentioned here, that really does not tell you, we're all worried about being victims. I don't think we're worried about becoming perpetrators here. And the victimology part of it is really not handled well by Arendt. And I just wanted to drop that part of it, because that's what we're looking for is how should the potential victims react, not so much how bad were the Nazis. The refugees that I grew up with almost never spoke about the Nazis. They mostly spoke about how did the other refugees behave in the camps, in the killing fields. The Nazis were taken for granted. They're out to kill you. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, George.
I just had a super quick interjection, and I was going to say what I like about Arendt, like when I first read this, and she was talking about not being able to, like, having no utility to the death camps. The first thing I thought of was that was true unless you sort of bought into the hyper reality, talking like Baudrillard would, I guess, talking about like the Nazi propaganda effort. If you bought into their idea of hyper reality, they're, you know, lying the truth, as she would say, then you would believe these like venomous racist lies, and there would be there's a utility function to whatever you want to do to the Jews at that point, because they really are this murderous cabal. And I think maybe what she's getting at is this, like with Arendt from talking, is the solution to that hyper reality is that it will melt if you meet people that aren't in it, that it excludes. If it makes claims and then you find them to be false. So the solution for people in the racist death machine in America has to be to meet people, like to see things that aren't a slanted news story, I suppose. I mean, it's trite. It's not like a full solution, but I don't know. It's just resonating more as I hear from this. So her solution is in particular a response to like Goebbels and the propaganda, truth lying, like she talks about in Origins of Totalitarian. Like that's the only way to get out of it. You have to get out of it by talking. So
thanks.
That's what it seems to me.
Thanks, Ben. Rob, you were up next if you want to join us.
Sorry, my hand was still up.
Oh, you already. Fran? Fran, are you there?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to keep it very brief because I don't have my thoughts really sorted out, but I want to respond to Bill's talk. My response to that is like the insistence on facts. And I'm curious about our insistence on facts. I'm wondering, is producing or using facts work to base us in reality? Is that the utilitarian purpose of it? And then also, or why I'm asking this question, because Hannah Arendt says that why I'm kind of like confused about it is because what I got out of the article about the concentration camp is that the Nazis produced nothingness. Basically, they were very industrious in the production of, in the end, nothing, no fact. People didn't get death certificates. The people weren't properly buried. It was completely isolated, so there was nothing. As I understand it, no real visual evidence, and it was not even supposed to be an evidence there. So this production of, this full effort into a production of nothingness or total destruction, and then now our insistence on either talking or producing facts and the utilitarian purpose of that, if that's too extreme, if we also should say, okay, there are facts, but there are also non-facts, alternate facts that we should take into account.
Roger, can I speak to Fran for a moment?
Yeah, please, Bill.
Fran, do you know the E.M. Cummings poem? It took a nipponized bit of the old 2nd Avenue L through the top of his head to let him know that war is hell. That's a very poor, any E.M. Cummings scholars on the phone call? What he's talking about is that there were people, we'd sold the 2nd Avenue L to the Japanese for scrap metal. These were made into bombs that went through the head of people who, at the end of the poem is, as Sherman knew, war is hell. So are we moving into a realm, and I don't know if Hannah can help us here. I know what you mean, Fran. Talk, facts. What do you do in a world, which I think we're going to find out sooner than we think?
I agree with you, Bill.
We're going to find out sooner than we think. Are we ready?
Yeah.
When a world that does not deal with facts. And that's all I'm saying right now. It would be a useful exercise. This is the COVID be damned. If these human beings could all be together and we could take solace from the fact of what we're feeling, what we're thinking. And I know that's dangerous, isn't it? Because feeling and mob mentality. But Fran, what I'm getting at is, do you agree that we don't want to have to take a bullet through the head to understand that we missed the boat about what we should have done? And I'm not quite sure. I don't know if the political process is going to help us. How are you all feeling? You should be shitting in your pants, right? How are you feeling? What are you doing? I'm sure everybody on the phone is going to vote, right? Will it make a difference? And what does it mean to have, do you know if your neighbors have guns? Do you know? That young dude that just shot the people the other night, 17 years old. That is the way we're going to go. That is where we're going. Now we have a chance in the light of this great conversation, this great woman. I mean, and this is not the place, sorry, get off the soapbox, but this is not the place, but somewhere in our life, we have to come to grips with maybe the vote is not enough. Maybe civil discourse is not enough. And the Nazis did create something, didn't they? They showed what evil looks like. And so maybe they did us a service. Maybe we now see what evil looks like. I think I smell evil at the Republican convention. That's immoderate to say. Thank you very much for indulging me. Thank you.
Roger, may I say something?
Yeah.
Okay, be patient with me. I just want to say that this darkness that Hannah Arendt is talking about is also applied to our society here in Colombia, with some differences, of course. So I just want to add that new human element, monstrous and evil indeed, that sometimes show, like in the concentration camps, and now in these days, for you guys in the US and for us in Colombia, deserves to be taken seriously and must lead us to talk and to act in public. That means that it has to lead us to political action. Within that context, I just want to ask you, Roger, what is the relationship between politics and morality from Hannah Arendt's point of view? Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Clara. That's a big question. Morality is for her something one thinks about. And she has a great essay called "Moral Considerations in Politics," in which we maybe could read. But morality can make us, thinking can make us stop, and in the sort of position of being moral and thinking and not participating in evil, have political consequences. But normally, politics and morality are quite separate for Hannah Arendt, except in extreme situations. I think we are in an extreme situation. I think that anyone who's in the last week or so, if not in the last year, if not in the last 5 years, but certainly in the last week or so, all I could say is where I'm coming from, increasing despair, and a feeling that this will not end without guns. I don't know if that was obvious or not in what I wrote yesterday in the Amor Mundi, that if any of you read it, but I think that's where we're headed. And if we don't pull back soon, that's where we're going. And I hear Bill saying, and I don't know if this is right, maybe we shouldn't pull back. I don't know if that's what, I get it, but that's where I see it going. I think there's very little chance there's not a lot of violence before and after the election. Whoever wins. And that could be a good or bad thing, Bill, depending on
I hate the idea, Roger.
the outcome.
I hate the idea. I hate the idea that it could come to this. I feel so comfortable in this conversation, sitting here looking at my lovely garden and thinking about, with all these great minds on this call, I feel so comfortable that I feel self-loathing as a result. And I know that's useless. So I don't know, Roger. I don't know. Is everybody on this phone ready for what Hannah Arendt told us she witnessed happen? Are you all ready? You can see. Are you ready? And what are your personal plans? Are you in touch with your feelings about it? I mean, we got a lot of young people in the street angry. How are people on this phone feeling about it? Maybe anger is not the point. Well, how are you feeling? What I don't get sometimes in the discussion is it's real. This is about something that's happening right now. The house is on fire. What are we going to do?
Can I say something?
Please. I'm sorry. Don't mean to dominate.
I'd just like to say that I was a soldier, and I lived in a country where bombs were exploding, and I took action, and I stood there, and I prevented further demolition of innocent people's houses, held up bricks, was tear gassed, was practically put into prison for several weeks because I protested the injustices in my country, which I feel very strongly about, and for which I am by many considered a traitor and by many considered treasonous. So I've done all that. Since I've been in the States, I've written books and articles about that because I'm old and I can't really protest. What I see today in America is the only thing that gives me hope is these demonstrations. The only thing that gives me hope is that Black Lives Matter isn't stopping. And when you talk, I want to cry during this conversation, the entire thing, reading this article, hearing what you're saying, hearing your pain, knowing what is going on in a recreation of history that's entirely devoid of truth, hearing people lie in front of. They have a platform and they can use it to lie. They have a platform and they can use it to spread total myths. And to Roger's point, where it's a matter of left and right, I feel that that's a facile distinction. I'm sorry, Roger. I don't think it's left versus right. I think it's honesty and integrity versus corruption and lying. And that the left and the right are not symmetrical. That what you have is for people who have a platform right now on the right, exploitative platform on the right, to use it to brainwash people, to use it to take away the last vestiges of our ability to think and to rewrite history. And I'm sorry if I exploded, but this is painful.
Can I respond to Bill for a minute?
Please.
Thank you. Bill, I'm struggling with this dilemma. You spoke from my head. And what I read now is, we are in it. We have a full fascism spreading. Today, if you read the Guardian article, the militia, the far right, is infiltrating the police, is one with the police in many, many branches and areas. So having a dialogue, like Buber style, is not applicable when one has the gun, when one side has the power, and the other is disadvantaged and doesn't. So there is no way of dialoguing in this way.
Right?
Am I ready for a revolution?
No, no.
I'm just.
There is no solidarity here that I feel will sustain a real revolution, a productive revolution.
Ayala, let me respond in one sense. I'm sorry. I have to run in a little bit, so I apologize. I can even leave this on and let you guys talk. My own, one of the things that I said at the very beginning today was Arendt's talking about the stages towards fascism or towards totalitarianism, and that you pass through many normal stages. There's no doubt that much of what we're seeing is proto-fascistic. And while I totally respect Daphna saying can't say left, right, in equivalent, and I think even when I said it, I said this was being a bit reductionist and there's much more complicated than that. But let me say, there are good arguments that a kind of right-wing fascism is emerging, and there are arguments that many people make that I think are needed to be taken seriously, and I don't think are facile. That there are certain, and this is not Black Lives Matter, this is others, left-wing fascisms that are emerging. But what I will say is this, at least in the United States, and this goes to Bill's, at least my response to Bill's question. I don't know what a Biden victory would mean. But I do believe that that if Biden wins, there will be violence. I do believe he will be put into the White House eventually. I could be wrong, but I believe it. And I think before we say we're in a fascist country, we should work our fucking asses off and get him elected and see what the next step is.
Yeah.
Or we say, look, it's arms, it's mobs. Give the process a chance. If it doesn't work, we'll have to reevaluate. But that's all I say is, look, this country, it may never be able to go back. Maybe that's a good thing. There may be institutions that take generations to be rebuilt. But I do believe there is enough of a center that they will abide by the election eventually. I could be wrong. That's my hope. And
hope you're right, Roger. Hope you're right.
I hope I'm right too. I have to run and
everybody hopes.
I have to go. By the way, there's a new person who's on the call. Or James, do you want to speak? You haven't said anything, and just I think your first session. So welcome.
Yeah, I'd love to say, reading these two chapters, after I puked my guts out and shit my pants, I loved it because it allowed me to really understand and engage what I've been seeing last night. And I said, Weltanschauung. What is this? What is the Weltanschauung? The Weltanschauung of these people is Schadenfreude, which is a total enjoyment of ruination. I said, there it is. That encounters it. I, as an artist, love to get myself empty so that I can respond purely to what I'm encountering. These two chapters did that for me. I think we need to move forward. There was an article in the New York Times, an editorial in the New York Times about 3 months ago about how we liberals have to gun up.
No.
What I'm doing today is just saying, how can I make art out of this? What images do I want to create out of this that I can share, that will strike people right between the eyes? And that I love the conversation, but I also believe we have to go way beyond this right-left thing. I totally agree with what you're saying. And how do I feel? I'm ready, baby. Send me in.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you thank you, group.
Thank you, James. I have
Bill,
to.
you quoted E. Cummings, and I just want to remind you that what E. Cummings said. He reminded us that Olaf, who was glad and big, shouted out as loud as he could, I will not kiss your fucking flag. There is some shit I will not eat.
Was it that profane?
Real quick, if you want to see what the Republican National Committee's platform is, I looked up the Nazi platform from 1920. The 25 points of the Nazi platform is basically what the Republican platform is today. Which just, I went, oh! Look it up. 25 points.
I'm going to let you guys, I'm going to keep this going.
Thank you, Roger.
I have to run. I apologize. I just have to be somewhere today. Thank you all. If anyone wants to stick around and talk, I'll leave it on. And good luck. And thank you all, and keep reading Hannah Arendt. I'll see you next week.